It is wonderful to be home. It is wonderful to be at the University of Chicago. It is wonderful to be on the south side of Chicago. And it is wonderful to be with these young people here. And what I want to do is just maybe speak very briefly at the top about why we're here. And then I want to spend most of the time that we're together hearing from these remarkable young people who are, I think, representative of some amazing young people who are in the audience as well.
I'm Max, and you can see what they've made me follow now. I have been involved in civic engagement and civic life here at the University of Chicago through the Institute of Politics, which has been an absolute blessing and a fantastic resource to all of us. The summer after my first year here, they gave stipends so that I think the number was 16 of us could go to Des Moines for the summer of 2015 to either work with certain press agencies or with campaigns. And I think that was a really eye-opening experience in terms of having to campaign directly and how far you can move the needle by moving one vote in the caucus. I'll have more time on this later. I've also been involved on campus with student government and college Republicans.
Fantastic. Max, were you somebody who was always interested in politics generally, or is this something that kind of came to you? And since you've been active in college Republicans, two questions around that. Number one, do you feel as if on college campuses sometimes you're not heard as much as you'd like to be? And because I think there's certainly a perception sometimes among young people who are on the more conservative end of the spectrum that colleges are a bastion of political correctness, and how do you sort of sort through that? But also, have you found ways in which you can connect and have a conversation with the college Democrat and the person who has a different point of view, so that we can encourage better conversations and better understanding and hopefully more progress?
So I think being interested in politics, I don't know that I came from a particularly politically active family. My mother was involved in the PTA when I was a child, and that PTA it's real.
PTA is a lot of work. Y'all have
I mean, in Connecticut, it is blood sport, but that's. I think the message that something like that would send is, she didn't need to do that.
Right.
She did that because the educational system and more broadly the community that was fostered in the town was important to her and something worth giving her time to, and something worth going out and, because no one pays you to do this, and you take a great deal of flack. So I certainly honor that commitment. And I think, in 8th grade, which was your first election, we, in social studies, were told...
Can I just say... I'm old. But please continue. In 8th grade. Go ahead.
In 8th grade, we were... All right, I'll pick a different age to be. We each at the beginning of the year picked a campaign to follow, sort of through to fruition. And each week we did a report for our teacher on how that candidate had been featured in the news, any sort of polling information that we had accumulated. We never got them back, but it was an interesting process in that it taught us to care about the news in a time when, maybe that wasn't something that you went home and watched. Right. And it was something that made you more cognizant of the issues. I was fortunate enough to go to high school in New Hampshire where we're pandered to immensely heavily, and even it's just part of the whole ethos that every 4 years they care. But or that people care about what New Hampshire has to say. And I think that one of the things that is a shame in that process is that there is a group that is active every 4 years because they're influential, they're big in the towns they're from. But you said don't boo vote, but don't boo act might be more apt, because you have a lot of these people who engage with the process only every 4 years and then are sort of gone for the in-between period. Mm-hmm. And then you have some who, if you're brought up that way and you're brought up to believe that your opinion's going to count for something, then go on to do big things. I had a friend whom I went to high school with, and she's been from New Hampshire her whole life. She's, I think, 20 now, and she's a state rep. Because, she ran for an open seat, and that's just how it goes up there. There's a commitment. In terms of being involved in politics, I was fortunate enough to take a year between high school and college, and I worked in Washington, D.C. in the Senate. And that's an eye-opening experience because it forces you to confront in a real way what you believe and why, and you gain a lot of information very, very quickly. I'm immensely grateful to Kelly Ayotte for the opportunity. And then, after coming here, that sort of changed my worldview. I thought I would come here and be an economist, like I think every first year believes at some level here. And that, coupled with my time at the Institute of Politics, which was a good structured force to show that there were many, many venues for us to engage civically. Let me explore things like campaigning in Iowa. Now, as for being a Republican on a college campus, yesterday NBC ran an article about this on their website, and it didn't say who we were. It just said the composition was one Republican and the rest were Democrats or progressives. And I had maybe 3 people send me the article and say, "Is it you?" But it is if you're watching. But I would say it depends on the setting whether it's something I'm particularly forthcoming with. At the Institute of Politics itself, I think most people know at this point, and certainly in the beginning of 2016 when caucus season was going on, those of us who'd been in Iowa and could do caucus math, which is, as you know, not real math, but that made you a hot commodity in the room when you would watch the votes tally. But there were venues certainly where I wouldn't have brought it up or wouldn't have been particularly forthcoming with it. I think people suspected it, but I didn't. I'll leave that to the other student government people in the room to confirm or not. But I don't necessarily know what I was afraid of, but I think that there's a sense that if you harbor a view that doesn't jive with the majority view, that you can expect some level of ostracization from certain people, or you can expect people to assume the worst aspects of you based on beliefs you may or may not hold, right? I don't think anyone sitting in this room agrees with their party on 100% of issues 100% of the time for 100% of the people in their party. Mm-hmm. I might be wrong, but if you raise your hand, I can't see you. Right. Yeah. And so I think that being a Republican on a college campus is in and of itself a sort of honor, because most people don't agree with you, and when you engage in the dorms and in the dining halls, and with those people who are able to see you, the person, and then you, the person with the political views, you're forced to know yourself well and to do soul searching well, and to understand why it is that you think what you think, and what parts of your past impact what you believe now and might believe tomorrow. I think the other thing is there's a significant empathy gap, not just here but everywhere. I think most people haven't had in their homes for dinner, in a real way, somebody who is significantly different from them, either politically or racially or for whatever reason. We've cloistered ourselves. And so I think that the liberal bastion aspect of college campuses certainly can be true. I've been, lucky here. The school's certainly committed to accepting, our thoughts. But I think a broader societal problem is that as we, if you look at the county map of 2016, you had, a lot of counties where, Secretary Clinton won over 80% of the vote, and the inverse was true for the president now. But I mean, and there's not understanding. We're not talking. It's not just that we're reading different news, but it's that we don't talk to each other anymore. And I think, it would be good. Civic engagement at some point will require a level of civility. I think there's a lot of problems with our politics.
That's great.
There's a lot of problems with our politics that begin at home. I think we blame intransigent politicians a lot for the failure of each of us to grasp each other well. I mean, so your mentor when you were a new senator, Dick Lugar,
great guy.
And
Love that guy.
And ultimately lost his primary for that reason.
Because he talked to me.
Yeah, because people couldn't stand to see their member, bridge a gap on a human level.
Yeah.
And I think that's sad. I think there's both an empathy gap, and also I think a lot of people see politics, especially in this generation, and they say, this is ugly, this is mean, this is something that you have, pretty experienced people doing. And, if the country's a ship and politicians are sailors, maybe the boat moves like a degree either way. But I think the lack of results stems from a lack of us understanding each other well.
Mm-hmm.
I think, Marco Rubio said it pretty well a couple months ago, that you can't really run a country when half of it hates the other. And somehow we're going to have to find ways to bridge that and to meet people who aren't like us.
Good. Terrific. Any other thoughts? Max, you got something to say on this?
So I think there was an interesting, it was either in the Journal or the Times shortly before the election that showed, that they made a generic Republican Facebook page and a generic Democrat Facebook page, and they showed you the news articles that would be on their, in their news feed that they could go and see. And, the fact of the case that, we now live in a, there's rumors that we just don't have facts anymore in society. I'm in an interesting linguistics class here now called Truth. And the first class, they played us an Errol Morris documentary with a man who was a defense attorney in the Bronx during the 70s. And, he'll tell you that if you ask somebody what shape a table is, you can get three answers. If you're sitting at the table, it's probably a rectangle. If you're underneath it, who knows, it's the ceiling. And then if you're looking at it right from the side, it's got a rounded edge, so clearly it's a semicircle. And I think that's basically where we are with the news. I don't know if the coverage were of the same issues that people would find factual difference anyway. I think part of the problem is that we don't agree on what the issues are that are pressing and facing the country. And I don't know how you get there, but I don't think that a national dialogue necessarily starts online or starts in the press. I think it starts door to door, and maybe that's in how people go about campaigning, in that right now it's easy to sort of know you have numbers if you can only get them to show up, and there is no onus to work to get somebody else to turn out for you to persuade them that your point of view is correct. Instead, there's a broad incentive to spend millions of dollars in advertisements saying that if my opponent is elected, the apocalypse will occur, rivers will run red, and Hawaii will sink. And I mean, again, if the ship only moves 1 degree, there's got to be a lot in that 1 degree to make all those things happen. But I think that, at all levels, there has to sort of be a civic conversation, and people have to be willing to talk to each other again. I don't know if that starts, maybe it does start in middle school, where you see in a class who has differing views, and then commit part of social studies time to have people talk through issues of the day and why they think what they think. But we have to get back to a place, I think, where people can talk to each other again.
Well, that's been a running theme, and I will say this: the reason I was able to run for the United States Senate was because, in addition to my base here in Chicago, I had spent a lot of time traveling around the state. And over time, I got to know people in parts of Illinois that would today be considered red. And I lucked out effectively that I was kind of under the radar screen, so political ads didn't characterize me And people would meet me, even though I'm this Chicago lawyer from a liberal district with an Arab-sounding name, and but I'd show up, and then you'd have a conversation, and you'd talk about their kids and basketball and what was happening on their jobs, and people got a sense that my frames of reference and my values were not so different from theirs. And that gave me the ability to break through some of the assumptions that people might have otherwise had. And in some ways, Iowa was the same way. I'm traveling around the state, as you know from having worked there. It's retail politics. You're going door to door. You're just talking to people. And we didn't have a huge amount of money, particularly initially, for TV ads. So it was just meeting people. And that does change people's assumptions when they get a chance to know somebody directly. So part of what we're going to have to figure out is how do we create greater opportunities. Now, that's true between red parts of the state and blue parts of the state. It's true even within the city of Chicago. I was yesterday with a group of young men who are part of a program designed to give them opportunities and pathways away from violence and crime. And these are some young people from 18 to 24. All were African American except one who was Latino. Many of whom had already prison records and had done some pretty rough stuff. Several of whom had already been shot, in some cases multiple times. None of whom had grown up with fathers. Many of whom had effectively been orphaned when they were very young. And so this would be the stereotypical profile of somebody who has a good likelihood of shooting or getting shot here in Chicago as part of the violence that has been plaguing the city. And what was striking when you sat down with these guys was they're young people. And if you had listened to them talking, you would recognize them as not that different from any other young man 18 to 24. What was different was their circumstances. They had grown up, in some cases, in foster care, or their mother was a drug addict, and they had been neglected. And so even within the city boundaries, a lot of times we will characterize our neighbors as something entirely different than us, that we can't understand and that we're afraid of and that we can't communicate with, and political rhetoric reinforces that. And they need to be heard too. And because if the six of you had been in that conversation, you would have come away not saying, oh, these are some thugs or super predators that I can't relate to. You'd actually say, man, if I had gone through what they went through, I'm not sure how things would have worked out for me either. And that creation of empathy then promises a different kind of civic response and political response than the one that so often we have. So that hearing other people, I think, is vital. And the question is, are there ways in which we can create opportunities to do that for more young people earlier on, before the lines of division start hardening?